Welcome to Modern Aikido's podcast. Today's episode, I want to talk about combatives. This is something that's gotten very popular in the self-defense realm of martial arts a couple of decades ago. Really, it's been it's been around in martial arts way back into the Second World War, mostly to train soldiers, but it was essentially a very hard hand-to-hand combat under the most extreme conditions type of training. And in the last several decades, Krav Maga was one of those forms that came about through military training. It was an art that was crafted to be something that was easy and fast to train soldiers and those who were dealing with extremely high violent type situations, the battlefield, warfare, that sort of thing. And so it became popular. It became a more civilian style of training. Dojos opened up, instructors were qualified and then went and taught, and they kind of spread the art that way. But the origin really is you are fighting for your life, usually in a lethal force environment, where everything around you is a threat or a potential threat. And there's a certain amount of applicability to that for the modern world. I mean, you could be in a situation where, it is a desperate, you're fighting for your life type of scenario. And so these combatives are definitely good to know. As you all know, I'm a big fan of cross training, making sure that what you're training doesn't have huge holes and omissions within them. And being in a severe high violence situation could be something you might be faced with. So the definition of those combatives really is more of a military style of hardcore high violence application. And that means doing a lot of damage, doing it very quickly, protecting yourself at all costs. You're counting on there's probably going to be weapons at play. You're making no assumptions for things like sport where, if your life is on the line, if you run out of gas, if you somehow make a mistake, that could be the end of you. And this is something that, when we watch movies and action, films and TV shows and things like that, it has that high level of drama, high level of tension. The problem is that we watch this entertainment and we translate that to be, well, this is what violence is really like. If you need to save yourself, you need to annihilate your foe, you need to absolutely, utterly destroy them, if not kill them, and you need to do it quick, and it has to be brutal. And this is sort of a runoff effect of violence being glorified and turned into entertainment, where it's meant to be attractive to the eye. It's meant to draw us into the drama and into the excitement, and that's viewed as a good thing, that those who deliver extreme violence are heroes. The reality is that those who go into the realm of extreme violence often do so at the cost of their mental health, PTSD, things like that. Not even just through being in a battlefield or high danger type situation. Even the training can create a PTSD type effect on your mind if it's not done properly. But what I want to get into today is kind of addressing the good and the bad of getting into combatives. Maybe you're wondering, well, maybe this is something I need to include in my training or to augment how I normally train, and I need to kind of fill this. This is something that I got into years ago, and I felt that it was more beneficial than it was negative. And granted, I was training with some really good, very well balanced instructors who had a strong martial art background as well as a real world application background, and they were not influenced by movies and TV shows and the imagination of what violence would be like. These were professionals that did it as part of their job, and so that helped me really understand and keep in proper perspective when you have to recognize when you may need to use, level 10 worth of assertiveness to get yourself out of a bad situation. And that these things are good to know, how to cover yourself, how to, deal damage very quickly. and a lot, because you have assessed that this is, if you don't do this, somebody is going to die, whether it's you or a loved one or both. Um, and that judgment part is something that is kind of up to everybody. And what I would always tell my students is, I can never be there to be the one who gives you the yes or no, this would be appropriate to use at this time. You're going to have to use your own judgment for that, and that's going to be entirely situational. And you're just going to have to do the best you can. And that's where the combative stuff is really good, because sometimes if you need to really stop somebody and they are in an adrenalized state, they're in a rage, maybe they're under the influence of some chemical or pharmaceuticals or something, and you need to physically shut their body down, knowing how to do that is a useful thing, and knowing how to do it quickly without making yourself vulnerable. And this is something that sport really gets away from, because sport doesn't want matches to end quickly. So they often will pair out the stuff that will stop a fight very, very quickly, because it's entertainment. They want to have matches go for a length of time. They want them to be dramatic. They want them to be exciting. But your own survival works under a different set of rules. And that is what combatives does very, very well. It makes you aware that you cannot be messing around, and you have to take care of business quickly. And that is the nature of, you are fighting for your life. You're in a battlefield situation, and it's do or die. And that kind of brings us to what I feel is the bad side. If you, for example, feel that that's all you need, is if you are basically a combat monster and you can destroy people, and I suppose I could narrow this down, say, like, let's say you master a throat punch. You punch somebody in the throat, that you crush their windpipe, you kill them, they're dead, the threat is over, and you feel like, okay, well, that would save me, right? The problem is, you really can only do that, or morally justified or legally justified doing that, if you are truly in a life-threatening, lethal force level encounter. What if you get a violent encounter that's not that level, and then you unleash on somebody, and you hospitalize them or even kill them? And now you're dealing with more than likely, if you're not a psychopath, you're dealing with your own mental trauma on top of perhaps legal problems. And the legal system can, in most countries, and I'll speak for the United States because that's where I live, can certainly destroy your life, even more so than somebody punching you in the head. You could argue whether it's worse or not to be thrown in jail for what you felt was justified use of force, but what a jury does not. And that is just the lay of the land. So I think that while the combative stuff has got a good place, you have to, when you train it, you have to safeguard and not just say, I want to flip the switch and I'm going to go full tilt. There's a common sort of a joke phrase of some of the bravado that young men tend to have is, well, if I get in a rage, I just see red and bodies start hitting the floor. Well, anybody who's trained or competed knows that is utter nonsense. It's not so much of you just unleash and you become this awesome offense machine that is completely unstoppable and opponents start falling at your feet. That's movie violence. That's films and entertainment. That has nothing to do with reality, and we have to put that right out of our mind. So the one caution I would say, and maybe you're one of those people or know somebody that is shopping for a martial art, and they say, well, I don't really care for this art or that art. It doesn't seem hardcore enough. I want to go for the most hardcore, absolute high level violence, because if I can do that, then everything else is covered. That's not true. In fact, you may be painting yourself into a corner where, when you train to suddenly just explode in violence, that more than likely you're going to overdo it. You're going to overcompensate and get yourself into some deep trouble. And that even could include injury. If you get into, unleash hardcore stuff, you could wind up getting your hands busted up. You could wind up, I mean, there is a cost to it. Um, that said, though, I think it is pretty crucial to at least get some exposure to that. One of the failings that I see with a lot of martial arts, a lot of dojos, a lot of instructors and martial artists themselves have zero exposure to somebody who really wants to do them harm, has that intent of, I am going to hurt you and I'm not going to stop until I get that. And this is room for improvement for any instructor or practitioner who wants to say, it's not enough for me to learn forms, for me to learn movement and tactics and these abstract concepts without actually putting it, at least trying it, or what is often called pressure testing. You could also call it stress inoculation training. There's certain types of training that can give you at least a taste of what that's like. So if it happens for real, it's not a complete and utter shock, because you are, instead of dealing like we normally would train on the mat with, training partners, they tend to be friends or people that we are very friendly with. There's no intent to do harm. It's more like, a couple of people playing cribbage on a Sunday afternoon than it is like what a reality would be of somebody wanting to do you harm. Not all of your training needs to be like this. Don't think that you need to do full immersion into that violent realm, because even training like that too much can start to create a certain level of almost mental instability. You become like paranoid, like, okay, I got to be ready for this at any time. And soldiers who have returned from the battle theaters often report that it's very hard for them to go out into public, because they are always on, they're always concerned about their safety. They're ready. They have that level of readiness, and it is mentally draining. It's emotionally not just exhausting, but it's hard on the nerves. And they find that they're much more at peace when they're at home alone, when they don't have to worry about watching every single person who might pull a knife or who might attack them. It's the mindset that can be overwhelming. And so I personally like the combative training as an aspect within the rest of the training realm, if that makes sense. So just be careful of also how it affects your rules of engagement. And this is what I found probably the most challenging, was keeping a cool head, assessing a situation which potentially might turn violent, and then trying to figure out how to use the least amount of force or assertiveness or aggression to resolve it. Like, that should be your main criteria. And this is often referred to as brown belt disease, when you get a martial artist that starts to become competent. They get some tools and some techniques that they find are reliable, that they work well, and they're like, I want to test it now. I'm a tough guy. They don't think about averting or evading or getting out of a violent situation. They're kind of waiting for it, even pursuing it, because they're curious. I want to test, and I want to see how my training goes. And that can be very dangerous, because real world violence is, you have no idea what could come, whether it could be weapons, suddenly multiple people. You might be facing a group or several people at once. All it takes is one unpredicted slip and fall, or something that would happen that is outside of your normal dojo controlled environment area, what you're used to. Those variables can be huge, much less you don't know, the size of your attacker opponent. They could be much bigger, could be much younger, they could be much more athletic, they could be much stronger. And you might not know that. They might have some training. They might have, maybe not training, but maybe they grew up in getting into fist fights for their, all of their childhood and their, through their teens into their adulthood. Maybe they like fighting. And now you're going to run into somebody who, they may never step foot into a dojo, but I guarantee you they've got training and experience behind them. And all of those are complete unknowns. So this is one of those things where, yes, it's good to know some of the good fundamentals for how to survive and escape a extremely high violent type situation. And I think combatives do a great job for that. There are some programs out there that are pretty well known, that have got tremendously credible instructors, that I feel are very good material. There's a lot of great things that they offer. Um, but I do think that you have to take great care with handling them. It's with tremendous tools like that, it takes a great degree of mental discipline, uh, ethics, and morals, as well as a strategic mind for when do I need to unleash this, because you have to be very careful of it. Um, depending on where you live and whatnot. I know here in the United States, if somebody winds up in the hospital, somebody's probably going to jail. It's just that's the way that it is. And whether that's a broken jaw, a crushed larynx or windpipe, a cracked skull, any of the stuff that can really stop somebody fast. Even a quick eye poke can send somebody to the hospital. An eye jab. It doesn't have to be very hard either, because that's a very, very delicate target. Um, so, if that happens and, the ambulance has to show up, usually the ambulance shows up after the police arrive, because ambulances don't like showing up to violent scenes without the protection of law enforcement. So when that happens, people are likely getting arrested, and then they'll let the courts sort out what happened. So a lot of people within the martial arts will say it's best to run away. I think it's maybe better to say it's best to avoid violence. I think runaway is probably a little too simplistic, and I think running away, or just fleeing, essentially invites pursuit, because that's kind of a human behavior. But if you can figure out a way to avoid the violence, it'll be much better that way. But, and this is where I do think that combative training, it should be a part of your martial arts experience, because sometimes you cannot avoid it. Sometimes you can be cornered, you can be outmaneuvered. It's the what if this happens, and it pays to have something, some gas in the tank for when those situations could happen, or if they do happen. Now, hopefully they won't. Hopefully you live your life in a way that you never encounter it, or the odds are much in your favor that you do not encounter something like that. But the world is a more dangerous place than people often think. And even in peaceful communities, there can be violence that happens that does not get reported much, or to try to downplay it so people don't really know, and they only find out the hard way what the reality can be. So I like having some exposure to that side, but I'm also very careful that that's not my rule of engagement, just to go start feeding elbows and dropping people in a very violent fashion. One interesting point that I noticed with a lot of the combative stuff was the focus on impact, on usually some kind of, often elbow strikes, forearm strikes, which I love. They're fantastic. I like them better than punches. But when I started crossing in with the training I was doing in combative stuff into my Aikido, what I realized is the ground hits even harder. And I like maneuvering so that gravity's on my side, and I'm gonna let the earth do my impact for me. Saves on my knuckles and my fists and whatnot. Now, granted, I do like elbow and forearm strikes. I think they're fantastic. I can keep hitting solid targets without having my hands swell up or my knuckles or fingers break. So I like that. But consider that if you know how to throw, and this by the way applies to wrestlers who can pick up and dump somebody or suplex them, judo who's can they got a whole art focused on hitting somebody with the ground, and that is devastating when you can plant somebody into the ground from a waist high altitude and they slam down. People, even if you're trained to do it, it's very unpleasant, especially if you're, unlike when you're dealing with a a training partner on a mat, you kind of have a bit of consideration for them. So you want to get them to throw, but you're not putting any real oomph on it. When you know how to throw somebody and you can throw them with intent, I think you can drop them, and the impact is probably about twice as hard as it would be if you just kind of, okay, I got you on the throw, but I'm not going to hurt you because I want to keep training. And much less that it's on wood floor or concrete or something really hard. It's those throws and that impact is not to be understated. It really is tremendous. And the last thing I want to wrap up with is the part of the rules of engagement, which is not only is the violence the last resort, you have to know when to back off. And this is one of those things where if you train constantly to throw the switch and you go into full attack mode and you're just unleashing and you've trained your body to just do it by rote memory, you can go too far. And depending on what the legal environment is where you live, I know here in the United States, there have been many cases where even though somebody was justified to take action and use force to protect themselves, and they can accidentally go too far when suddenly their assailant is now gone from being an assailant to now being helpless. And I mean, this can happen in a matter of a blink of an eye, literally a split second. If you attack somebody or you continue an attack beyond where you have a credible threat against you, and they are no longer a credible threat, and you keep going, perhaps because your training just trained you to just keep going and keep going and keep going, you can now get in legal trouble. The whole self-defense argument can break down in that split second, and you go from being the victim who was trying to protect themselves to being an assailant themselves. Now you're attacking a helpless person. And I will say personally, I don't care for the idea that, if somebody meant to do you harm, they were in the midst of doing you harm or about to do harm to you, and that was very clear, and you not only stop them, but you go like a hair too far, like by a second or two, that it's now your fault, that now you're a criminal. I don't agree with that personally. Now, if you go so far as to, pick up their unconscious body and drop them off the side of a building, yes, that is obviously going too far. But the idea that a lawyer or prosecutor can argue down to a split second that perception is so fast that you had the responsibility to spot whether that one elbow hit that you did dazed him, and now you're hitting a helpless person. I think that's kind of some Weasley lawyer language argument stuff, and I don't really care for that. To me, I do have a certain amount of, if somebody really means to do you harm, then their safety is forfeit. Not to the point where they lose their life, and I suppose even that's situational. But if you have to stop the threat, you stop the threat, and then you halt. And this, I will give credit to Krav Maga, because the people that I had met that were doing it showed me that the art itself evolved, because on a battlefield, you don't care about your opponent at all. You don't care if you kill them. You don't care if you absolutely completely detach their head from their body or turn them inside out or blow them into a fine mist. No consideration whatsoever. That is a battlefield. That's not a civilian type environment. And where I will give Krav Maga great credit is it evolved more into the civilian realm to start teaching its students of, you use just the minimum of what you need to stop a threat. And from what I'd seen earlier, my early exposure to Krav Maga, it really didn't have that doctrine built in yet. That evolved, and it was a great thing that it did. I think it was necessary, and I think that any art that, because admit this, all martial arts are teaching their students to cause damage, in one way or another. Even if you're controlling somebody, usually at the end of the control there is a submission, which is either a choke or some kind of a limb detachment or things like that. So all of these are on some point of a spectrum. You are learning to harm somebody. The key is and we've all learned this very easily because um, it's easy to learn to hurt somebody. What takes the great time of training to build the skill is to learn how to control without hurting somebody. That takes a tremendous amount of dedication and skill. And so, uh, and granted, that's also the, you'd call it maybe the ivory tower ideal, that your assailant encounters no injury or is not harmed at all. You just are able to stop them. But in the real world, when you're dealing with somebody who's bigger, younger, stronger, maybe on drugs, maybe on adrenaline, is in a full-on rage, the ivory tower ideal is still the goal, but you might have to really convince them by either causing them injury or harm or pain or some combination to stop. And that's just the reality. Every person that I know that has been a professional that has dealt in the realm of violence or who has, notable experience with real world violence would agree with that and just say, you don't want to try to hurt anybody. It's not your intention, but sometimes people, they have to be stopped, and they won't stop unless you either immobilize them completely or make their body so that it won't function anymore to keep coming at you. And there are police incidents which have been reported. People have been shot 20, 30 times in the body, and they keep coming, they keep attacking. So the idea that you merely deal more damage to stop somebody, uh, you know you might be in for more than you realize, more than you think. And it pays to be ready for that, to be adaptable, to say, I just need to keep going. I need to, if what I'm doing isn't working, I got to change it up and go to something that will stop this. And you don't have, in cases like that, you often have little or no time. Um, and so I wanted to cover this too, because I know that, we talk a lot about on the forum about cross training and about, getting exposure to different arts, which I am thoroughly in favor of, thoroughly endorse it. And there are very few martial arts that have nothing to offer. I think all of them have some good stuff to offer. Um, you just kind of got to have to search and hunt and sort through, like what Bruce Lee would say, gather and collect what you find useful and reject what is useless, and that's where your art becomes your own. Um, but I would definitely say that combatives are not entirely good, nor are they entirely bad. They, like every other art, have got some great stuff to offer. And I think what they have to offer is filling a hole that almost all martial arts have, which is the high level, heavy duty, you are fighting for your life and you can't lose. You have to get this done. Um, so for that reason, I would say it is worth at least stepping into that realm a bit. Maybe to take it on for 4 to 6 months, find a good instructor, get some exposure to it, and just see how it goes. If you don't like it, either maybe find somebody else to do it or somebody that fits what you would like to do. But I would highly recommend having some material that fills that realm of, you are now frightened for your life and you need to do something about it. Um, Personally, I integrated a number of the lessons and a number of the techniques and methods. What I found with my Aikido as I blended them is that Aikido has a lot of that stuff that's kind of either been neglected and is rusty. It's not really described in how to weaponize it, would be a term what was used in my old dojo, is how to weaponize technique, how to make it potent and solid for something, for a environment like that, but also how to integrate things that were not taught within the Aikido realm. Things that I really like head covers, um, being able to manipulate the legs and get into grappling, situations, where you've captured legs, you're doing body locks. I think personally think wrestling, catch wrestling, some of that other grappling works really well with Aikido. And as I went and looked back through some of the books of Morihei and some of the older generation practitioners, I would see the occasional photo that would look very much like a wrestling or grappling technique or method. Of course, I wish I had filmed so I could actually watch how they trained on a regular basis to see, was that stuff that was kind of included then and it sort of faded away, or did it kind of just get lost as Aikido got more focused on wrist locks and things like that? I don't know. But there are, some good sources that have photos of, whether it's more high on the ground with a neck choke type lock, or, things like that. The way that I view Aikido is it should not omit anything. If you have a way of taking somebody down, why not use it? If it works, it's efficient, it's effective, it's a high percentage and low risk, why not? Why would it not be Aikido? And I guess this is perhaps a way to look at Aikido. If Aikido is about efficient control, there are many arts out there that are about efficient control. So why not get some exposure to them? And what I find with a lot of the combatives is they really are on getting efficient control. They just tend to do it in a very high impact way. And I think for a legitimate reason. Sometimes when an attacker gets into a rage and his brain programming says attack, it can take quite a bit to shift that computer from that attack mode into all right, I'm done. I don't want any more of this mode. And that's just human behavior, and that should really be understood. And that is something that's hard to emulate in a dojo environment. It's ugly, and I shouldn't say it's hard. It's often distasteful, and I think a lot of instructors and practitioners are hesitant to kind of go into that realm of, this is kind of frightening, this is scary. But violence is frightening, it is scary, it is ugly. And if you're not used to facing it, when it does rear its ugly head, you will be shocked and you will probably hesitate. And it's not so much the physical technique as if you're used to seeing glimpses of this, it will not surprise you when it happens. And that's the essence of the mental side of survival, which is keep a cool head, don't let yourself be surprised, and be able to act with mental clarity. And I think this is when Musashi talked about this as the void of you aren't letting your mind get in your own way. You don't have your agendas, you don't have your plans, your expectations, you just leave all of that. And what's left is you just observe and act, and you do it without hesitation. So I think some exposure to combative training is very helpful. I think it's beneficial. It's certainly helped me. I believe it's also profoundly helped my Aikido. So highly recommend it. And find a good place to go and good people to train with, and good things will always happen when you do that. So thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate it. I also want to have a shout out to my supporters, people that are subscribed to the Spirit Aikido online program, and those who have contributed to the tip jar. Thank you so much. And until the next episode, enjoy your training.